The Filipino sun punished the streets of Manila that October morning. Manny Pacquiao, wearing a simple shirt and dress pants, walked through the alleys of Tondo, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the capital. Although recognized as a boxing legend, senator, and national icon, Pacquiao never forgot his humble origins. His steps were followed by a small team of advisors and security personnel, who maintained a discreet distance as the former world champion interacted with local residents. The visit to the neighborhood wasn't an official political event, but part of Pacquiao's personal commitment to maintaining contact with underprivileged communities. His attentive eyes observed the precarious housing conditions, children playing amid garbage, faces marked by the poverty he knew so well. The memory of his own childhood, when he sold cigarettes on the streets to help his family, remained alive and pulsating in every decision he made as a public figure. It was then that his eyes found an unusual scene in that Filipino setting. Sitting alone on a concrete step, a black girl of approximately 10 years old was leafing through a worn school book. Her dark skin contrasted with a predominantly Asian environment, and her concentrated gaze conveyed a determination that Pacquiao immediately recognized. It was the same look he had when, as a hungry boy, he dreamed of changing his life. The girl didn't immediately notice the presence of the entourage approaching. Her thin fingers turned the pages of the book with reverential care, as if each leaf were a precious treasure. Only when Pacquiao's shadow partially covered her book did she look up. There wasn't the customary spark of recognition that the former boxer was used to seeing. There was only curiosity and, perhaps, a slight apprehension in the small student's gaze. Pacquiao crouched down to be at the girl's height, with a respect he dedicated to everyone, regardless of age or social status. The warm smile of the man who had faced the greatest fighters in the world was now directed at that lonely child. The security guards and advisors watched from a distance, witnessing the beginning of an encounter that no one could predict how it would end. The girl's eyes revealed a mixture of shyness and strength that Pacquiao recognized immediately. In this first contact, he learned that her name was Amara, daughter of African immigrants who had arrived in the Philippines just 2 years ago, fleeing civil conflicts in their native country. The language barrier was partially overcome by the limited English they both shared, transformed into gestures and expressions that transcended words. The former world champion noticed the improvised school uniform she wore, clean but visibly worn and too big for her skinny body. When questioned about her presence there, alone with a school book in the middle of Monday morning, Amara lowered her eyes. Her small shoulders dropped slightly, as if carrying an invisible but immense weight. The revelation came in words broken by emotion. She could no longer attend school. The family, already living in precarious conditions, could no longer afford the school fees for foreigners, nor the necessary materials. Additionally, as an immigrant without complete documentation, institutional barriers rose like insurmountable walls. Pacquiao's face, marked by numerous fights in the ring, now revealed a new expression of struggle. His eyes, which had already faced the greatest sporting challenges in the world, now narrowed before a different adversary: the social injustice that kept children like Amara out of classrooms. The girl's story echoed in his own trajectory: the extreme poverty that almost prevented him from studying as a child, the nights he slept hungry, the early school abandonment to help support his family. In silence, Pacquiao listened as Amara explained how she still tried to study on her own. Every day, at the same time she should be in school, she sat on that step with books borrowed from a compassionate former teacher. There, under the scorching sun or tropical rain, the girl clung to her studies as the only hope for a better future. Her determination, greater than her small body, profoundly impressed the man who had built his legend on the pillars of perseverance. Pacquiao's advisors exchanged glances, recognizing that expression on their boss's face. It was the same determined look that preceded his greatest fights, when all obstacles seemed insurmountable. Without uttering a word, they already knew something extraordinary was about to happen. Amara's story had touched a sensitive point in the fighter's soul, awakening memories of his own struggle against poverty and exclusion. That same day, Pacquiao's official limousine traveled the narrow paths of Tondo until reaching a structure of zinc and plywood. It was Amara's family home, an improvised structure that housed 6 people in a space smaller than the locker room the fighter used before his international matches. The girl's parents, Abina and Kofi, received the illustrious visit with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Informal workers, they survived with cleaning and construction services, always fearing deportation and living in the shadows of Filipino society. The presence of the famous boxer and politician in their humble residence attracted curious glances from the neighborhood. In a short time, a small crowd formed around the house, all anxious to understand the reason for that unusual visit. Inside the small dwelling, without cameras or journalists, Pacquiao listened attentively to the family's complete story. The accounts of discrimination, difficulties in adaptation, bureaucratic obstacles, and the constant struggle for survival in a foreign land deeply touched the heart of the man who knew well the bitter taste of poverty. As they talked, Pacquiao's gaze surveyed the modest but impeccably clean environment. On the peeling walls, Amara's school certificates from her native country were carefully preserved and proudly displayed. In a corner, a small improvised shelf made of crates stored used books, revealing the value that family, even in their poverty, attributed to education. The contrast between material scarcity and the richness of aspirations reminded Pacquiao of his own mother, who always encouraged studies despite extreme difficulties. The afternoon advanced as Pacquiao took notes in his personal notebook. His advisors observed in silence, recognizing the signs that a new project was being born in the ex-boxer's mind. It wasn't just about one child. It was about a system that failed so many others like her. The experienced politician was already calculating the legal obstacles, necessary resources, and alliances he would need to form. The fighter within him, accustomed to seemingly impossible battles, was already outlining the strategy for another significant victory. When saying goodbye to the family, Pacquiao made a silent promise, conveyed only by the determined look he directed at Amara. No grandiloquent words or theatrical gestures were necessary. The girl, with the wisdom that difficulties had prematurely granted her, understood that something had changed. The man who was leaving her house carried with him not only her family's story but a commitment. In the simplicity of that encounter, far from the spotlights that normally followed him, a seed of transformation had been planted. In the following weeks, the corridors of the Filipino Senate witnessed a new crusade by Manny Pacquiao. With the same intensity he applied in his boxing training, he immersed himself in research on educational legislation, immigrant rights, and international refugee protocols. His advisors, accustomed to his tireless pace, could barely keep up with consecutive meetings with education experts, NGO representatives, and officials from the Ministry of Education. Amara's story had transformed into fuel for a greater cause. Pacquiao faced the expected resistance. Political opponents questioned why so much energy was being dedicated to foreigners when so many Filipinos still struggled for quality education. On social media, xenophobic comments multiplied, criticizing what they called the senator's misplaced priorities. The press, always eager for controversy, transformed the topic into a national debate. Pacquiao, however, remained unwavering. For every criticism, he responded with data on how inclusive policies strengthened the educational system as a whole. Parallel to the political articulations, Pacquiao mobilized his private foundation. Without fanfare or publicity, a team was designated to resolve Amara's immediate situation. Lawyers specializing in immigration worked on regularizing the family's documents. Social workers organized the girl's transfer to a quality private school, where a full scholarship had already been negotiated. The new uniform, school materials, and even a simple computer were discreetly provided, without media exposure of the family. Pacquiao's silent determination inspired others to join the cause. Filipino businessmen, touched by the story that began to circulate behind the scenes, offered resources to expand the project. Volunteer educators presented themselves to create school reinforcement programs for immigrant children. Pacquiao's former ring opponents, now united by admiration for his new fight, sent international donations. What had begun as the desire to help a single child was gradually transforming into an educational inclusion movement. In his Senate office, during long nights of work, Pacquiao frequently stopped to contemplate a photograph. It wasn't one of his many images raising champion belts, but a simple photo of Amara sitting on her step, studying alone. That image had become his new purpose, a constant reminder that, beyond the titles and fame, his true fight was against the barriers that prevented children from dreaming. The girl who couldn't go to school had, without knowing, taught a valuable lesson to the world champion. A rainy November morning marked Amara's return to school. No longer sitting alone on a concrete step, now she walked through the corridors of a respected institution in Manila. Her new uniform, with a school emblem carefully embroidered, replaced the improvised clothes from before. On her back, a backpack containing not just books, but also the renewed hope of a different future. Pacquiao observed from a distance, in a car parked across the street, respecting the family's desire to avoid exposure. His eyes, which had contemplated the greatest arenas in the world, now were moved by that simple scene of a child entering a classroom. Amara's adaptation wasn't easy. The language, cultural differences, and curious glances from classmates represented daily challenges. In the first weeks, the school principal sent detailed reports to Pacquiao, describing both the difficulties and progress of the new student. The girl faced each obstacle with the resilience she had demonstrated since the first encounter with the ex-boxer. Her determination to learn, to belong, to build her space in that new environment, impressed all the teachers. Without knowing, she carried with her the same warrior spirit as her benefactor. Meanwhile, in the Senate commission rooms, Pacquiao advanced with his most ambitious project. A legislative package that included facilitation of school documentation for immigrant children, scholarship quotas in private institutions, and multicultural educational inclusion programs was taking shape and gaining supporters. The astute politician used his popularity and respect earned in sports to navigate the complexities of the legislative process. Each negotiation, each amendment to the original text, each vote won was celebrated as a round one in a seemingly endless fight. The impact of Pacquiao's actions began to reverberate beyond Amara. Other immigrant families, inspired by the story that now circulated in foreign communities in Manila, sought information on how to regularize their children's school situation. Private schools, following the example of the institution that had welcomed the girl, created their own scholarship programs for refugee students. International NGOs turned their eyes to the Philippines, interested in the model that was beginning to be implemented. The multiplier effect demonstrated how a single well-directed action could trigger systemic transformations. At home, Amara surprised her family with her academic progress. Nights were dedicated to studies, with the same concentration that Pacquiao had observed in that first encounter. Her parents, still working in informal jobs but now with legal assistance for regularization, looked with admiration at their daughter, who overcame obstacles that seemed insurmountable. When Amara shared her daily learning, teaching Filipino words to her younger siblings, her eyes shone with the same intensity as Pacquiao's eyes when he climbed into the ring representing his country. 6 months had passed since the first encounter. In a ceremony in the plenary of the Filipino Senate, broadcast live to the entire country, Pacquiao officially presented the Educational Inclusion Bill. By his side, symbolizing the beneficiaries of the new legislation, were 5 children of different nationalities, including Amara. The girl, now more confident and fluent in the local language, remained serious and focused, aware of the importance of that moment. Her presence there, no longer as an excluded student but as a symbol of a new national policy, represented an extraordinary journey that moved those present. Pacquiao's speech, delivered with the same passion as his post-fight interviews, echoed through the corridors of power. Without explicitly mentioning his own story of poverty, each word carried the weight of his personal experiences. He spoke about how education represents the only real chance to break cycles of misery, about how talents are wasted when school doors close, about how a truly strong nation is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable members. The message transcended partisan issues, touching on fundamental human values that few would dare to openly contest. In the stands reserved for the public, Abina and Kofi, Amara's parents, watched with contained tears. Their faces, marked by years of hard work and constant concerns, now displayed a rare expression of hope. The reporters present, perceiving the emotional charge of the moment, directed their cameras alternately to the family and to Pacquiao. That image, a former world champion transformed into a defender of vulnerable immigrants, captured a narrative that resonated deeply with the Filipino public, a people who knew well the experience of seeking opportunities in foreign lands. At the end of the session, while politicians and authorities exchanged formal greetings, an unscheduled moment occurred that would later be reproduced in global news. Amara, breaking protocol, walked up to Pacquiao and extended a small package wrapped in colorful paper. The ex-boxer, visibly surprised, bent down to receive the unexpected gift. Upon opening the simple wrapping, he found a school notebook with drawings and an essay written by the girl, describing how her life had changed in recent months. The last page contained a photo of Amara's class, with her smiling in the center, finally belonging. Pacquiao's reaction, captured by the cameras present, dispensed with words. The man who had faced the most fearsome fighters on the planet, who rarely showed fragility in public, couldn't contain his emotion. His teary eyes, his protective embrace of little Amara, his silent gratitude for that simple gesture, everything conveyed a more powerful message than any elaborate speech. At that moment, it wasn't the champion or the senator that the public saw. It was simply a man who, recognizing his own past in the eyes of a child, found purpose in his position of influence. The bill faced predictable obstacles in the legislative process. Amendments attempting to dilute its impact, maneuvers to postpone votes, questions about implementation costs. The political game followed its natural course. Pacquiao, however, demonstrated the same resistance that had made him famous in the ring. For each blow, a response. For each obstacle, an alternative strategy. His years as a boxer had taught him that persistence often overcomes pure talent, and that lesson was now applied in Manila's political arenas. Amara's story, initially an isolated case that had motivated the senator, now served as a powerful practical example. In less than a year at the new school, the girl had not only reached her corresponding school year but was beginning to stand out academically. Her teachers reported exceptional dedication, a thirst for knowledge that inspired other students. In a mathematics Olympiad among schools in the capital, Amara won third place in her category, generating headlines that associated her success with Pacquiao's initiative. The girl became, without intending to, living proof of the wasted potential when educational barriers are erected. In parallel, Pacquiao's foundation expanded its pilot program. What had begun with Amara now benefited dozens of immigrant and refugee children in similar situations. Partner schools, sponsoring companies, and volunteers created a support network that went far beyond formal access to education. Reinforcement classes, psychological support for migratory traumas, cultural integration, and even complementary medical assistance complemented the educational program. The model, developed in the Philippines, began to attract international attention, with delegations from other Asian countries visiting to understand its implementation. Amara's family also experienced significant transformations. With legal assistance provided by the foundation, their migratory situation was regularized. Kofi, with his experience in construction, was hired by a partner company of the program, receiving specialized training and a formal work contract. Abina, taking advantage of a professional training program, was studying to become a nursing assistant. Amara's younger siblings, now also regular students, adapted to the new reality with the natural flexibility of childhood. The cycle of exclusion and marginalization, which seemed destined to perpetuate itself, had been interrupted. When the project finally came to the decisive vote in the Filipino Senate, after almost a year of proceedings, the plenary was packed. Human rights organizations, representatives of immigrant communities, educators, and journalists closely followed each vote. The final count revealed approval by a narrow margin, but sufficient. Pacquiao, generally expansive in his victories, remained surprisingly contained. His gaze sought, among the crowd present, Amara's face. Upon finding it, they shared a discreet smile, a silent communication between two fighters who understood the value of persisting when all prognostics are unfavorable. 2 years after that casual encounter in the streets of Tondo, a special ceremony was organized at a public school in Manila. The educational program for immigrant children, now implemented nationally and recognized by UNESCO as a model of inclusion, celebrated its first concrete results. On the stage decorated with flags of the various nationalities benefited, Pacquiao waited for his moment to speak. His gaze swept the packed auditorium, seeking familiar faces among the crowd of students, family members, and authorities present. The program director, a respected educator who had initially been skeptical about the project's ambitions, presented impressive numbers. More than 2,000 children, previously excluded from the educational system, now regularly attended schools. The academic achievement rates of these students exceeded initial expectations, dispelling prejudices about their adaptation capabilities. Teachers reported how cultural diversity enriched the school environment, benefiting all students. The success transcended statistics, materializing in individual stories of transformation like Amara's. When his moment to speak came, Pacquiao surprised everyone by setting aside the speech prepared by his team. With the naturalness of someone conversing with close friends, he shared his childhood memories in General Santos City, the days when hunger was a constant companion, the early abandonment of school to help support his family. He spoke about how boxing had been his unlikely escape route from poverty, a chance that few receive. His words, devoid of political jargon or grandiloquence, connected his personal story to the educational project in a way that everyone understood. Each child deserves a chance, regardless of where they were born or the circumstances that brought them there. The most awaited moment of the ceremony came when Amara took the stage. Now 12 years old, wearing the impeccable uniform of her school, the girl who once studied alone on a step now represented hundreds of similar stories. With surprising poise for her age, she thanked Pacquiao and everyone involved in the program. Her speech, alternating between the Filipino she had learned and her native language, symbolized the success of the proposed integration. When she mentioned her dream of becoming a doctor to help underprivileged communities like hers, a reverent silence took over the auditorium. The emotion culminated when Amara presented Pacquiao with a commemorative plaque, secretly prepared by all the students benefited by the program. The simple object, made of recycled wood and decorated with cultural symbols from the various countries represented, contained an engraved message: "To the man who taught us that barriers exist to be torn down." The ex-boxer, visibly moved, embraced Amara while photographers recorded the moment. They were no longer the powerful politician and the refugee girl. They were two warriors celebrating a shared victory against adversaries that many considered invincible. At the end of the ceremony, as animated conversations filled the auditorium, Pacquiao discreetly observed Amara's interaction with other students. The shy girl he had found 2 years earlier now radiated confidence, natural leadership, and genuine joy. In her gaze persisted the determination that had captivated him in that first encounter, but now accompanied by something new: hope. There was the true legacy of his career, more significant than any belt or title won. In the transformation of that life, and of so many others that would follow, Pacquiao found the final validation of his own extraordinary journey from the poor streets of General Santos City to the global spotlight and, finally, to service to others. On that sunny afternoon in Manila, surrounded by children from various countries united by the fundamental right to education, the world champion understood that his greatest victory had not been won with boxing gloves, but with the courage to see himself in the eyes of a child who, like him one day, just needed a chance. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.